One of my father's retirement hobbies has been researching the history of our family. A couple of years ago for his birthday, my siblings and I got him a subscription to Ancestry.com to feed his new research interest. He's clearly gotten the most out of that gift because last Christmas he gave each of us a book that he had put together over an inch thick, all about our family genealogy. It was pretty cool to go through and see all the different generations and think about where we had come from. Though I grew up in Minnesota, I have generations of family who lived right here in New Hampshire. And of course, each branch of the family had a story, or at least a moment, of arrival here in the United States. For any one of us who is not 100% Native American, our family story contains a moment, or perhaps many moments of arrival here in the United States. For some, that arrival was forced. For others, it was a choice. For others, it was somewhere in between. For some, it was hundreds of years ago, and for others, it was within your own lifetime. The narrative of immigration is deeply a part of our country's larger narrative. And it's a part of the story that we often romanticize. When we think about the immigrant story, the first thing that comes to mind is often a story of possibility and opportunity. The United States has been put up on this pedestal, the ultimate place to come and find success and prosperity. Early immigrants thought of this as the land of milk and honey, spoken about in the Bible. And there was this sense that you could be anything you wanted to be if you came to the United States. There has also been a romanticized narrative of welcome that has been woven throughout the history of this country. Emma Lazarus' poem, The New Colossus, etched into the Statue of Liberty, speaks to this narrative. She writes, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Coming to the United States has often been imagined as coming through this golden door, a golden door that welcomed all. The United States has been painted as a sanctuary, a place for the tired, the poor, those yearning to be free. Unfortunately, both the history and the current reality of our immigration system are very different from this romanticized narrative of welcome and opportunity. Starting way back in 1882 with the Chinese Exclusion Act, the laws that have been put in place to determine who does and who does not get to come to this country have more often than not been rooted in racism. We have been a sanctuary only for those who look right and talk right. The Immigration Act of 1882, more commonly known as the Chinese Exclusion Act, was the first law to explicitly ban people of a certain nationality from coming to this country. It was the outcome of years of racial hostility against Chinese Americans and set the stage for laws that were passed later on that put restrictions on people coming in from different countries. Even though we might look back now and condemn the Chinese Exclusion Act, it was the beginning of the creation of our modern-day immigration system, a system that routinely privileges white people and discriminates against people of color. We've seen the racism inherent in our immigration system play out in so many ways in just the last 10 years. Many of you probably remember the uproar about Arizona's SB 1070, which required police to determine, the immigration status of someone arrested or detained when there was reasonable suspicion that they were not in the U.S. legally. How do you think that reasonable suspicion was determined? Who do you think was actually asked to present proof of their status in this country? It certainly wasn't people who look or talk like me. Closer to home, here in New Hampshire, there has been the practice of setting up temporary security checkpoints within 100 miles of the border between the U.S. and Canada. This continues to happen here in New Hampshire and has over the past several months, and I know they're planning on more in the months to come. Several years ago, I experienced one of these checkpoints before I even knew what it was, driving alone back from Vermont. I stopped and I rolled down my window, and the officer asked me if I was a U.S. citizen. Not knowing what was going on, I said yes, and he waved me right on. I certainly had no proof of citizenship with me in the car. I don't go to Vermont with my passport. But it didn't matter, because I looked and sounded like I belonged. So he didn't even ask. The blatant racism that shapes our immigration system and enforcement not only flies in the face of what many of us imagine our country to be and represent, it also goes against our Unitarian Universalist belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. The way that our immigration laws are written, some people are looked at with more worth than others. Some whole countries are viewed with more worth than others. We are a sanctuary here only for the select few who are deemed worthy of entry. And so it is that Unitarian Universalists have long been advocates for the reform of the U.S. immigration system, recognizing that the laws that govern that system are designed to be oppressive and unjust. We UUs have often partnered with other people of faith in this struggle, as faith communities of all kinds recognize the ways in which the U.S. immigration systems dehumanize people and separate families. This congregation here and my congregation in Nashua have both been an active part of the New Hampshire Immigrant Solidarity Network, a coalition of faith activists who organized over a year and a half ago to respond to recent developments around immigration. In the past 2 years, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, commonly known as ICE, has been detaining individuals and threatening deportation with increasing fervor. Immigrants who have lived here in Manchester and in Nashua for years have shared that they are now frightened by the stories they hear of and their own experiences of ICE officials showing up unexpectedly, following people home, and working with the state police to detain individuals who have no prior criminal record. You here in Manchester have voted to be a physical sanctuary for immigrants. You have pledged to take in an immigrant who is threatened with deportation, to allow them to live in this building while their case is fought in court, relying on the many years old tradition that immigration officials don't take people out of churches. I've seen the room that you've set up, the shower that you've put in, the preparations that you've done. The fact that you are needed in this way shows how broken our immigration system is, how far from the ideals of this country we have strayed. For some, there is no sanctuary to be found in this country other than the literal sanctuary of a church. Often these are people who have left their own country out of fear of persecution because there is no other choice. They came to find safe harbor here in a country that promises freedom and justice only to be met with suspicion and discrimination. The Solidarity Network holds frequent vigils in front of the Norris Cotton Federal Building, which have been going on now for more than a year and a half. I've seen some of you at those vigils. Each time we vigil, we engage in a Jericho walk, circling the federal building 7 times to echo the number of times the Israelites marched around the walls of the city of Jericho before those walls came tumbling down. Recently, the vigils have included blowing the shofar each time a round is completed, again, echoing the story of the Israelites. This past week, the security officials at the federal building decided to object to the shofar. They said that it startled people inside because it sounded like an alarm, like there was an emergency. And so they asked the shofar player to either play far away from the building or not at all. At the meeting after the vigil, one of the Jewish attendees pointed out that the shofar is actually meant to sound like an alarm. Those security officials were not far from the intention. The shofar is used to wake people up, to make them pay attention. And we are, in fact, in the midst of an emergency. We do need to wake up and pay attention, and we definitely need those people inside the federal building to wake up and pay attention. We need to recognize the ways in which our immigration system is unjust, the ways in which it was created with racism at its very core, deliberately making this country a sanctuary for some, for the select few, rather than for all. It is an emergency. Who are we willing to harbor in the face of this emergency? Who will we offer sanctuary to? Who will we seek to protect? Who will you, as a sanctuary congregation, offer your sanctuary to? Even as I've been discouraged by the stories of immigrants here in New Hampshire and across the country, I have been inspired by the work of so many New Hampshire people of faith over the last several months. I've been inspired by the story of your congregation and all that you are doing to get ready to offer sanctuary when it is needed. Like so many other systems in our country, our U.S. immigration system was built on racism and discrimination, and those original intentions continue to play out in ugly ways today. But we can be a part of creating a new story, a new narrative, one in which our country is truly welcoming and truly embraces the beautiful and sacred diversity that immigrants have brought and continue to offer. We can make our country into a sanctuary for all, not just those who look right and talk right. We can set a new intention, beginning here in this sanctuary, for our country's immigration system, rooted not in racism and fear, but instead in justice and in love. May it be so.